Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. We are at the very end of the year, kind of bittersweet, also really surprising because with the passage of time, as you grow older, time flies by, and every time you look at the calendar and realize that it's December, it just hits you because you're like, wow, this year went by so fast. In terms of reading, this was a pretty decent year for me. As time has gone by, I have stopped really caring about the number of books that I read, because I feel like once you get into that mindset, it just really messes up with your reading. Because I feel like social media, even though it promotes a lot of reading, on the other hand, it also makes it a competition. How many books have you read this year? It just puts a lot of pressure, especially for people who create content based on books. Because the more you read, the more obviously you can share with your audience, but at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure because you're not really in the moment when you are reading the novels. You are constantly thinking about the pace of your reading. You want to get done with the book so you can share it with your audience. But I have taken things really slow this year. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about 7 books that were at the top of my reading list that I absolutely enjoyed. So let's begin. The first book that I want to talk about is Mornings in Janine by Susan Abulhawa. I read it at the beginning of the year, and it's a historical fiction. As the title says, it is about Palestine and takes us through the generational trauma and also the atrocities that happened to Palestinian people via a family, 5 generations of a particular family. And it takes us through the Nakba, 1948, then also to the Sabra Shatila camps that were based in Lebanon and the atrocities that happened there as well to the refugees. So it's a pretty devastating read to read, and I would highly suggest you read this to get a basic fundamental understanding of what is actually going on since the past 75 years. Even though it's a fictional piece of work, but at the same time it gives you a really fundamental ground to stand upon to understand the current situation of what is going on in Gaza right now. It's a really somber read, but at the same time will give you some basic understanding of the situation. So a highly recommended novel. The second book that I will talk about is The Sundown Motel, and it is written by Simone St. James. One of my favorites from this year, and I think that when I talk about favorite books, it will have a place there as well. It's a crime thriller and it has parallel timelines. So 2 stories are happening at the same time. Obviously at different times. One is the story of 1982 and one is happening in 2017, and both the stories are obviously connected, and it's just a plain good old crime thriller, but with supernatural angles to it. But at the same time, I'm not much into supernatural stuff, and I'm not really a fan of horror, but the horror scale of this one is pretty low, and supernatural things they creep you out at certain points, definitely, but it's not something that you need to be overly cautious of, I would say, because by the end of it, you just kind of get habitual of it and you're like, okay, whatever. The third book that I will talk about is a nonfiction, and it is The 4 Agreements, and it is written by Don Miguel Ruiz. I have done a detailed book discussion on this. But yeah, it basically talks about these 4 agreements that if you apply it in your life will become better. And honestly, the agreements that this author has talked about, yes, the way I have said it might sound cheesy, but they really put a lot of things into perspective. And if you read this book from the perspective of understanding these 4 agreements and implementing those things in your life, you will definitely benefit from it. I have tried implementing it, but obviously, when you read stuff, you become really motivated to implement those things, good things in your life. And then you move on and read something else and you kind of forget about those things. The 4th book on my list is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Again, a historical fiction, a really nicely written novel, I would say. For me to read a historical fiction till the end and talk about it in this way it's a great feat. Basically written on women of war. When we talk about war and when we read about war, we always read it from the perspective of men, and we never really talk about women, even though obviously women and men both play such an important part in our societies, and the society works because there are men and women in the society, right? Kristen Hanna has done an incredible job at writing this novel. Now, next book is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, and if you have been on social media, This was all over social media, especially during fall recommendations. People were recommending this book. It was such a fun read. It's basically a story of a housemate. By the way, I was absolutely shocked by the end. I love when novel ends at a shocker. I have always been in search of novels, of thrillers, where the ending line just leaves you shocked. And this was the first time that I found it in a book, and yeah, absolutely loved it. Even though the first part, like in the middle of the novel, it really felt as if it's a typical romantic novel, and I was like, what am I reading? Am I reading a thriller or am I reading a romance? But things changed in the second part, so highly recommend this. The next book I want to talk about is again a non-fiction, and it is 10 Myths About Israel, and it is written by Ilan Pappé. If you just want to get an understanding or a historical perspective of what is happening in Gaza right now, then you definitely need to read this book. 10 Myths About Israel is a really well written book, and it clears a lot of myths, clears a lot of questions that you might have in your mind. The last book that I want to talk about is something that I am currently reading. I'm almost 200 pages in, and it is The Poet by Michael Connolly, America's greatest living crime writer. And I have literally no doubts about that, because the bit that I have read till now is mind-blowingly good. I am so intrigued by the happenings in this novel, and I'm pretty sure that this is going to end up as one of my top reads of the year as well. So that's why I have added this to the list, and it says at the subtext or whatever, murder, there is a rhyme and there is a reason. How the story is basically there is this investigative reporter, and his brother is a homicide detective, and he, according to the reports and stuff, he committed a suicide. The more our investigative reporter looks into this case, the more he realizes that it is way more than a suicide. It's a pretty intriguing read. At 200 pages in, I am already making some theories of my own, but it's still a lot is mystery, and I need to read it as quickly as possible to know what is going on further. So those were some of my favorite reads of the year. Share your favorite reads in the comments down below, and let's have a conversation going. What did you read that left an impact on you? With that note, we have come to the end of this video. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please make sure to do that. And I will see you guys in the next video, inshallah.